Chapter 4. "Have you nailed down the plus-size selection yet?" Mary Jo Brockmeyer, Eve's boss, asked as she strode through the room to her drawing table. "I'm working on swimsuits," Eve said as she worked her way through the buyer's catalog on her desk. "And then you're finished?" "Yeah." "Good. We need to get this summer line finalized before Thanksgiving." Mary Jo pulled her white pantsuited frame onto the stool across the way and set her shimmering gold reading glasses on her nose. At one time, Mary Jo had been the height of fashion, but 3 kids and 40 extra pounds hadn't helped in that department. Still, she knew her stuff, and she was consistently on target with what to buy, how much to buy, and when to buy. As she went back to her work, Eve thought how glad she was that Dustin had pushed her to take this job in the first place. Despite the sometimes long hours and out-of-town trips, he had said it was an opportunity she just couldn't pass up. He had always had the uncanny ability to know what was the right opportunity when. She missed that about him. Unconsciously, she splayed one set of fingers under her hair and dropped it onto her shoulder. She had learned a lot in the last 2 years, and only part of that was about the fashion industry. "What do you think about this one?" Eve asked, holding up a drawing of a frilly black and turquoise number. "What do you think?" Mary Jo asked, gazing over the top rim of her glasses. Slowly, Eve set the catalog on her desk and bit the inside of her cheek, lost in thought. "It's cute, but the cut of the bodice looks binding to me. It seems like it's too high up under the arm to really be very comfortable." "And your gut says?" "There's something better," Eve said as she flipped that page over. Mary Jo smiled, and the light freckles on her nose danced under the shimmering of her glasses. "Good girl." "I'll spot you 14 points, AJ said. 14 points? Lerone Barnes asked next to him as they sat in the ambulance eating lunch in the grocery store parking lot. "You've got to be kidding me." AJ took a bite of his sandwich and grabbed for his root beer. "It's charity, man. I'm being generous here." "Generous? Ha! Generous would be giving me a real chance. There ain't no way Jacksonville will score more than 7, and that's if they're real lucky." "So, then, you're betting that the Titans can't make more than 21? "The Titans can make 21 in their sleep." "I said more than 21, AJ said, emphasizing the difference with his root beer can. "And I said there ain't no way I'm taking that bet. I ain't no fool." "Really?" AJ asked, looking over at the young man who had been his partner for 6 months. "'Cause you look an awful lot like one to me." "Man, you are so funny, they ought to put you on the Tonight Show." "Well, they called last week, but I had to turn them down." AJ took another bite. "So you're really not going to take my bet?" "Nope, I'm really not going to take your bet." AJ shrugged. "Your loss." "No," Lerone said slowly. "It would be my loss if I took that bet. I could just say, bye-bye, little 20. The radio between them squawked to life. "High-rise heart attack, Buckner and Robin." In a flurry of wrappers and cans, they threw the rest of lunch in the bags as AJ started the ambulance. "Dispatch," Lerone said, grabbing the relay. "This is Unit 5. We're on it." 10-4, the response came. "Well, so much for a relaxing lunch," AJ said, angling the ambulance into traffic as he flipped the emergency lights and siren on. "And I thought this job might be boring." AJ glanced over at his partner. "Ain't nothing boring about it." By the time Eve made it home, it was after 8. That was okay. The less time she had to spend in the apartment, the better. She went into the little office off the kitchen and dropped her work things next to the drawing table. With a yank, she shrugged out of her black jacket and hung it on the chair. Heels were the next thing off, and by the time she made her way back to the kitchen, the only parts of her outfit left were her hose, her straight black miniskirt, and the white button-down shirt. For good measure, she unbuttoned another button of the shirt and pulled the tail of it out. She would change eventually, but for now, just being in the apartment and not falling apart were enough. She always hated this time of day. On his days off, this was the time that she had always enjoyed most with Dustin. Either there would be a glass of wine waiting for her, or dinner would be on the table, or even just the fact that she could be with him again was enough to make it the best time of day. Now, there was just emptiness filling the air around her to the point that sometimes it was hard to breathe. Offhandedly, she flipped the dark hair back over her shoulder and reached into the refrigerator for the shrimp sauté she had managed to make 3 nights before. Even cooking, which was normally something she loved to do, had lost its mystique. Without someone to share it with, what was the point? She pushed the plate into the microwave and hit the number 2 button. Depressing, she thought as she opened the mostly empty refrigerator and looked inside for something to go with the shrimp. Everything was depressing. Not really paying attention to her own actions, she reached in and grabbed a bottle of water, twisted off the lid, and pitched it into the trash. Another meal for one. Another night all alone in a place that felt utterly devoid of life. When the microwave dinged, she pulled her plate out, grabbed a fork, and made her way to the living room. The couch bed, which she hadn't bothered to push back in from the night before, took up most of the room, so she slipped past it to the chair. With one hand, she picked up the remote and hit power. Noise, blessed, wonderful noise, filled the room, and she laid the remote down. It didn't matter what it was, news, sports, movie, music. As long as it filled some piece of the deafening silence, it was welcome. Pushing all of the thoughts from her, she sat back and forked a small amount of rice into her mouth. This was called getting on with your life, and as much as she hated it, she knew it was the space she was doomed to live out her days. "How was work?" AJ's mom asked when the two of them were seated at the little table over chili macaroni. "Fine," he said. They could have tape-recorded the conversation and just played it over each night. The parts never changed, and after almost 2 years, he had the whole thing memorized. "You?" "Fine." She ate a piece of macaroni. "We got magnolias in, ugliest things you've ever seen. The flowers were the size of quarters, and the leaves were pitiful yellow. Did you get that box taken over to Chelsea's?" "No, I didn't have time." "How long does it take to drop a box off?" "I figured she'd find 6 other things she forgot, so I might as well wait." "She should have let me help her move," his mother said. "We got it done," he said. "It wasn't that hard." "Yeah, but she already forgot a box of clothes. Who knows what else she forgot?" "Chelsea could forget 6 boxes of clothes, and she wouldn't exactly freeze to death," he said, shaking his head. "Just because you wear the same pair of jeans for 3 weeks. "You should be happy. Less laundry that way," AJ said. "Less laundry, less water. Less water, less money to the city. See, it's a good thing." Slowly, her dark-tinged red hair shook side to side. "When did you start worrying about water bills?" "The first time my water got cut off because I hadn't paid it." "Well, at least LA was good for something." Every extended conversation eventually wound back around to LA, no matter how far away it seemed at first. "Imagine that. You thought I'd ruin my life, and I actually learned something useful." "Yeah," his mother said. "Imagine that." His interest in the chili mac waned, and he stood. "I'm going out to the garage." He heard the sigh, even though it wasn't audible. "Don't play too loud. I don't want Mrs. O'Malley to call the cops again." "I'll try to keep it down," he said as he bent to kiss her cheek before he made a hasty exit. The 10 o'clock anchors were busy reporting the day's events before Eve finally talked herself out of the chair so she could shower and get ready for bed. She ran water over her dish and put it in the dishwasher just as a small smile crossed her face. "Which do you like better, dishes or laundry?" he asked again, and she laughed softly. Dishes or laundry? What a question. Grateful for something else to focus on, she closed the door and thought back to the party. Her mind skipped right over the depressing points to those moments that held some kind of levity. Almost every one of those involved one person in particular, and her heart smiled at the thought of him. He seemed so utterly free of any and all encumbrances like propriety and respectability. Not that he was an oaf, but he just didn't seem to really care what anyone else thought. It must be nice to live that way. In the bathroom, she snapped on the light. She started the shower and gazed at the woman gazing back at her from the mirror. With the practice of 100,000 times, she reached up and clipped her hair up. Thoughts of their few moments together slipped through her mind, and she shook her head so that the tendrils of hair that had escaped the clip danced. It had been more than a year since she had laughed that hard. He was such a nut. It would have been impossible not to laugh. "Here, open your mouth." She laughed outright at that thought as she slid out of the skirt. Never in her imagination could she have pictured doing something so childish, and yet nowhere in her being could she even care at this very moment what anyone else had thought. With a soft sigh, she stepped under the gentle cascade and closed her eyes. Dustin would have liked AJ. Eve could see them together, playing pool and trading jokes. Then again, there weren't too many people that Dustin didn't like. That was how he was. He had never met a stranger, and she doubted now whether the term stranger was even in his vocabulary. Her mind slipped back to her first company party and the 16 pairs of shoes they went through trying to find just the right ones. She knew he didn't really care, but because it made so much difference to her, he had. He knew nothing about fashion, but it was her passion, and he had learned. Tears stung her eyes when her mind fell over the memory of him sprawled at the bottom of the steps that now rose just above her, shoes in every color of the rainbow scattered on the steps above him. She wanted to laugh, but that hurt too much. The details of why he was hurrying to get the box to the top escaped her memory now, but the sight of him dazed at the bottom of those stairs still hadn't. Stairs. It was strange how easy it was to stay away from them, and yet how they kept pulling her, body and soul, to them. One simple set of stairs up to a bedroom that she still remembered him carrying her into the first time. It wasn't their first home, but it was the first one they had found, planned, and bought together. Water combined with the tears streaming from her heart as their happiness at entering that bedroom the first time melted into the first time she had entered it without him. Never could she have imagined how horrible that ache could be. She hadn't even had the heart to sleep in the bed that first night. Instead, the cold floor had held her as she cried. The 3 nights since that first one she had actually spent there without him were so miserable she had finally given up. Now her bed was the couch, her living space anything that had nothing to do with those stairs. She didn't even turn the light on to them anymore. They were much better off, swathed in darkness and forgotten. Hitting the faucet to cut the water off, Eve put her head down and crushed her eyes closed in a futile attempt to get the memories to stop, but still they scratched across her heart like a serrated knife edge. Her face crumpled into the soft towel she pulled from the wall. She would never understand why God had looked at their love and thought it not worthy of intervening to spare Dustin's life. It had to have been God's choice, because she knew it wasn't Dustin's. He would have moved heaven and earth to get back to her, so the fact that he was no longer here put that choice clearly in God's corner. Avoiding eye contact with herself, she pulled her nightshirt over her still damp body, grabbed a hairbrush, and walked out of the bathroom. As she walked through the apartment, she ran a hand over each and every light switch, plunging the area behind her into spirit-crushing darkness. In the living room, she folded herself onto the couch bed and crossed her legs. The late-night comedians were bantering back and forth, and slowly she ran the brush through her hair. One day down, one night to live through, and tomorrow she would be that much closer to seeing Dustin again, to feeling his arms around her, to hearing the sound of his "I love you" ringing in her ears. One day and one night. She flipped her hair to the side and collapsed onto the pillow, watching the images flit across the screen. They were her only refuge, the only way her brain could have something else to focus on. Slowly her eyelids drooped forward, and fatigue caught her on its undercurrent. The yawn sank through her, and she pulled a blanket over her bare legs. They were joking about the president. She didn't get it, but she laughed anyway. a hollow, uncaring laugh as sleep dragged her down with it into its unknowing abyss. The rhythm flowed easily beneath AJ's drumsticks. Lost in the middle of the music, he always had the luxury of forgetting about how hollow his life really felt. Even in high school, when his latest crush broke up with him, or when he was cut from the soccer team, the music could always make the whole world disappear. True, most things seemed to be working out at the moment, but there was still that deep, intense need to just forget that everything else existed for a few hours. It was probably why the whole band dream had taken such hold of him. He remembered that first gig he and the guys had performed for the little nightclub nobody had ever heard of. That was the experience of a lifetime. To be swathed in darkness, punctuated by neon blue and fuchsia light, playing like he had nothing to lose and living like he never had before. He had been chasing that feeling ever since. The little garage was hardly a substitute, but he had no better choice. Working, honing something he wished was a natural talent into something a group might consider using, had all seemed so worth it until dirt broke, the electricity had been cut to the rat hole he was living in. The landlord generously called it an apartment. It wasn't. By that point, it was a simple choice between chasing a dream and starving to death. Amazingly, he had even managed to make himself believe it wasn't so bad for 3 days. But then they had laid off half the staff at the playground equipment store he grudgingly called his job. He was number 3 to get the news. Both drumsticks pounded their way into the crescendo. Reality. That's what his mom and Chelsea called it when he got back to Houston. From where AJ sat, reality was the prize at the end of playing the sucker's game of chasing a dream. When that song ended, he reluctantly looked at his watch and reached over with the drumstick to hit the off button. Tomorrow would be another day he didn't want to face. Carefully, he pulled the tarp over the drum set and sighed. If somehow he could just wake up tomorrow and be someone who actually enjoyed life, he would have given almost anything to make that happen. But life was life, and in AJ's world, that meant that enjoyment had nothing to do with it. This has been White Knight, Book 2, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Never miss a second of the story. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel today.